Hotep.
Black people have been wrong. Black people have been wrong. Black people have been wrong. As I said earlier, of a knowledge of
It's been wild, man, with these fires. I'm one block from where the Hollywood Hills Evac Center was last night, or a couple nights ago. Oh, you can't hear me? Oh, got it.
Oh, this a real Hotep brother. Oh, this a real Hotep brother.
We are back. We got a very special show lined up for you today. I got Jeremy Slate in the building. We're going to be talking to him about ancient Rome, the good, the bad, and the fugly. Yes, sir. Saturday class is in session. Big brain content only. You know how we get down over here on the Griff Report. Special edition of the Griff Report. Go get your notepads ready. It's about to go up. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to this one. I'm looking forward to this one, man. Are you ready? Are you ready? Something fire for your Saturday.
Black people have been wrong. Black people have been wrong. Black people have been wrong. As I said earlier, of a knowledge of self.
Hotep.
I'm your host and riff god. Hotep Jesus. Hotep Jesus. Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com.
Oh, this a real Hotep brother. Oh, this a real Hotep brother.
I'm your host and riff god. Hotep Jesus. Hotep Jesus. Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com.
Oh, this a real Hotep brother. Oh, this a real Hotep brother.
Hotep. Hotep.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special edition of the Griff Report. I'm joined by Jeremy Slate, who is a leader in PR, specifically in the podcast space. If you have a podcast and you're trying to get your brand right, holla at Jeremy. And he's also an expert on ancient Rome. We'll be speaking to him today about the good, the bad, and the fugly of ancient Rome and start to demystify this rather interesting time period. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I know we just got to chat on my show a couple weeks ago, so glad to do this, man.
Yeah, we had a fantastic conversation. Really, really enjoyed that conversation with you. We were talking, and you were saying, "Oh yeah, I got my what degree? You got a degree in Roman history, right?"
So I actually I have my undergrad degree is in Catholic theology.
Okay.
And then my master's degree is I actually studied why people worship Roman emperors. And there's a lot of I didn't learn any lessons in doing that, by the way, because the first book I wrote, all the titles were in Latin and stuff like that, so I didn't really communicate to anybody. So I got smarter from that moment on, and I just explained to people, hey, my degree is in the Roman Empire, because it's much easier to communicate.
Wait, you know Latin?
I took Latin for 13 years, man, all through, I went to Catholic grammar school, high school, college, grad school, all that jazz. So I did from 6th grade through grad school.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
It makes learning things really, really easy because you have a lot of word roots and stuff like that.
Right, yeah. Oh my God, so when you see the stuff on the Roman buildings, you can decipher all of that.
Yeah, it's kind of funny too, because I've been to Rome like 3 times or 4 times. And I'm usually explaining things to my wife and what they say, and we'll have it's always old people for some reason. We'll have this old couple start following us around and listening to what I'm saying as we're talking about things. But yeah, it's been kind of fun to be able to do that.
Wow, that's one hell of a cheat code, man. I gotta admit, I'm a bit jealous.
It wasn't cool when I did it 15 years ago, though, man. Nobody cared until all this TikTok jazz popped up.
So wait a second, how does one even begin to decide to learn Latin? Did your mom know Latin? Your dad know Latin? Or was it an interest? Because this is a young age. Was it?
Yeah. Well, so both my parents didn't finish high school, actually. I'm from a really small town in kind of farm country, New Jersey, where everybody thinks we live in West Virginia. And I was in
Jersey
public school.
in the building. Shout out to Jersey.
I was in public school in 2nd grade, and I was one of those kids that finished my work really fast. So they're like, so He's smart and he finishes his work fast. We'd like to talk to you about ADHD and why he needs Ritalin. So my parents pulled me out of that public school, put me in a Catholic school. They weren't Catholic at the time. It just kind of seemed like a good option. And you go to Catholic school, you learn Latin. That's just what you do.
Okay.
So initially it was because I didn't choose it. Then it was because I was really interested in it. And I just had some great professors in undergrad, and it made me kind of look at the Roman Empire in grad school.
Oh man, wow. I went to Catholic school as well. Unfortunately, I got kicked out. Oh man. Well, technically, I didn't get kicked out. We were about to move, so they're like, "All right, we're not going to kick him out since you guys are about to move, so we'll give him a pass." Anyway, so the question that you studied in school was, why do people worship Roman emperors? And before we get into that question, because I really want you to answer that question, are there any Roman emperors, or should we worship Roman emperors? Are there any of them that deserve any type of adulation?
I struggle with that, man, because at the same time, everybody talks about Marcus Aurelius and like, how great he is and how wonderful the meditations were. And the thing that you have to understand is Marcus Aurelius, who dies in 180 AD, is the last of what are known as the 5 good emperors. So he's the last one of those. They do something different than all the ones before them and all the ones after them. What they actually do is, rather than taking their son and naming their son emperor, they take the closest qualified person next to them, adopt them, say, hey, you're my son now, and they make that person emperor. So you have from 96 until 180, you have very good rule, a very productive empire. Marcus Aurelius changes all that. He's like, I know, like, I read all this stuff and I'm reading Epictetus and I'm a Stoic philosopher, but I got this really good idea. This thing that's worked for 100 years, I'm going to break it and name my spoiled 16-year-old child Commodus to be emperor. And if you look at even Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, he says that the point when that decline started is actually with the rule of Commodus. Now, it's going to take from 192 when Commodus dies to 476 in the West to actually fall. But that is the point when Rome's real growth and idea of expansion actually ends, is with the rule of Commodus. So everybody wants to give a lot of credit and worship to Marcus Aurelius. I think he's somebody too. He likes to say acta non verba, actions over words. But at the same time, he didn't do that. He did words over actions. So what are you going to do, man?
Wait a second. We just got started. My mind's blown. I'm sitting up here thinking like Marcus Aurelius is this wise man, near flawless, and his fool decided to break the. Why would he do that? Why would he choose his son?
Well, there's a couple things as well. Like the emperors before him didn't have natural born sons, so like there also wasn't that option. Because,
why didn't they have natural born sons? Was it just luck? Bad luck?
Bad luck, but also a part of it is like, especially like Emperor Hadrian. It was very well known that Emperor Hadrian was gay and his boyfriend went everywhere around with him. So they weren't exactly like producing heirs, if you know what I mean. So you do have kind of sorry to lay that on you. So you do kind of have that situation. You have Trajan before that, who's pretty old when he becomes emperor already. So a lot of these guys weren't, I guess, in the son-bearing age, if that makes sense.
Wait a second.
Or in the son-bearing of ways.
So we got 5 emperors, you said, and
yes, the 5 good emperors.
And Marcus Aurelius is the last one. How
Yes.
many of them were homosexual of those 5?
I don't know that offhand.
Okay.
I know Marcus Aurelius had a son, so obviously he was pretty straight. Though it was pretty well known that his wife was sleeping around on him quite a bit.
Oh no!
So if you read his meditations and you read actual history, like how history looks at the wife of Marcus Aurelius and how Marcus Aurelius looks at his own wife in the meditations are 2 very different things. He talks about her,
So
being
he
this
knew?
very chaste. I would assume he knew. You know what I mean? Like if he doesn't know, like the poor guy, like come on.
What did he say about her? He was like, man,
Well,
my
he
wife
talked
a
about
hoe?
her being this upstanding and chaste woman. Like that's what he would talk about. But if you read other histories, there's talk about her sleeping around with generals and things like that. And that's actually why he's like bringing her on campaign and things with him to keep an eye on her. So he had a lot of issues with his own family, right? So he's not really applying a lot of what he writes about.
Oh, man. Well, here's the thing. I'll throw him some bail. You got to make mistakes in order to have this wisdom, right? So
Yeah.
he's like, listen, my wife's a hoe. Here's how not to have a wife that's a hoe. Here's what I did wrong. That's what all right. So, all right. Anyway, I just, again, my mind's blown. So first 5 emperors.
Well, these aren't the first 5 emperors. These are what
First
are called the
5 good
emperors.
emperors. Right.
Yeah, because so Augustus is the first emperor in 31 BC. This is way down the road in 98 AD, right? So we're like 100 and something years down the road. The first dynasty are what are called the Julio-Claudians, and it's a really mixed bag because the Julio-Claudians are a very mixed bag. The first emperor being Augustus, he keeps trying to name successors, and they keep like dying in strange ways. So he ends up getting stuck with Tiberius as the second emperor, who's his wife Livia's son. So basically his adopted son, somebody he really doesn't want, but he ends up getting stuck with. And then you have Tiberius ends up having Caligula be his successor, and Caligula ends up being a little off the wall. So then Caligula gets replaced with Claudius. Claudius is okay, but he's a stutterer. And I don't know if you've ever seen Robert Graves' I, Claudius. It's kind of an interesting rendition on him. He's replaced with his son, or adopted son, Nero. So the kind of the first, it's a very, very mixed bag in your first 100 years of emperors.
Mm-hmm.
So the 5 good emperors to have stable rule from 98 to 180 is a really big deal. Like it's almost 100 years of stable rule.
Okay, so let's talk about Nero. What's the good and bad TLDR version of Nero?
So I've read a lot of different historical opinions on this, and modern historians tend to look at him differently than ancient historians did. So when you look at Nero, Caligula, and Domitian, they're kind of seen as these really 3 evil emperors. But if you look at how they acted historically, all 3 of them were very anti-senatorial, right? They wanted to rule by themselves and not have the Senate have any power. Where do historians come from? The Senate, right? So you're going to have a lot of that language coming out of the Senate. So a lot of modern historians look at them from, were they great guys? Likely not. Were they as bad as we think they are? Also likely not. It's probably kind of a black PR campaign in a lot of ways to make them look bad. Now, if you want to look at Nero historically, how we look at it, he becomes emperor at 16. He finally manages to kill his mother by the time he's about 26 because she's kind of ruling through him his first 10 years of being emperor. He wants to be emperor and have absolute power, but he also wants to be an actor and a lute player. And in that time period, actors were very much looked down upon. Like if you were hanging out with actors, it was kind of like, oh, why would he be doing that? Like those are actors. Why would you do that? So that's what he wanted to do. He would do stage plays. He would invite people. He also did chariot races where he would win every time because he's the emperor. Why would you let him lose? So he's a very interesting character from what we know about him. And then towards the end of his life, he dies in 69 AD. But in 64 AD, we have kind of this great fire of Rome. And at that point in time, he's actually away from Rome when it happens. He's in Naples actually playing his lyre, and people are attending to watch him play his lyre. And he only hears about the fire because one of his own palaces is in danger. And that's when he goes back to Rome to try to take care of it. After that point in time, he builds what's known as the Domus Aureus, or the Golden House. It's kind of this palace to himself, which is this enormous thing in a lot of places where apartment buildings had previously been for poor people that had burned down from the fire. So Romans start to really not like him from this. They were kind of on the fence with him before the Great Fire, but after this, they really start to not like him. And that's where a lot of opinions from Nero come from, is him building this golden house. And even not long after him, there's kind of 2 emperors that rule for less than a year. And then the emperor that rules longer is Vespasian after this, actually knocks down the golden house and builds what you know as the Colosseum today in that area, because he's saying, okay, I took what Nero built for himself and I'm building it for you, the people. So if you want to look at those specific things, Nero gets blamed for the fire specifically for building the golden house, but there's a good chance he likely had nothing to do with it since he wasn't even there.
So fire.
Sorry, I just kind of like vomited on you.
I love the vomit. I love the vomit. Pause. Now, fire is the big thing right now. You're talking to Shane Cashman tomorrow?
Yeah, Shane and I are doing one all in the fire of Rome.
Right. So I don't want to steal Shane's thunder. I love Shane. Wonderful individual. I don't want to steal his thunder. So make sure you guys tune in for that interview tomorrow with Shane Cashman. So we're not going to talk about the fires. I spent a lot of time thinking about how to create a great civilization. And a lot of it has to do with the leadership, right? So you mentioned that before Marcus Aurelius dumbs out and breaks a decent system, how did these people choose their leaders? What qualities, what traits? Was there a system in place? Were there examinations? How were they choosing these leaders?
So I think it's kind of important to understand kind of the Roman civilization, if that makes sense, first, like before we get into that.
Let's do it.
And when people hear Rome, a lot of times they think of the empire, and people are like, Julius Caesar was a really bad emperor. And I always have to tell people he was never emperor. There wasn't an empire when he lived. So it's 3 eras in time. It's a kingdom first in 753 BC. It becomes a republic in 509 BC. And from 509 to 31 BC, it's that republic. Then from 31 BC to 476 AD, we cross the time barrier there. It's an empire, and that's an empire in the west. In the east, which is what we
wait.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between an empire and a republic?
Get to that in just a second.
Okay.
I just want to mention the Eastern Empire. So the Eastern Empire that we call the Byzantines falls in 1453. So it lasts another almost 1,000 years. So that's kind of the landscape. Now, if you want to look at what's the difference between a kingdom, a republic, and an empire, the early kingdom, the first king of which is Romulus, they would have just been like warlords. Because I think a lot of times, especially with these AI pictures out there, we see Romulus dressed in the Roman armor of like the late republic and blah, blah, blah. They wouldn't have had armor. They barely would have had chainmail in that point in time. It would have been closer to like the warlords in the movie Braveheart. That would have been very similar to what the kingdom of Rome was like.
Okay.
Wood huts. They're just kind of living out in the land and surviving. When we become a republic in 509, the thing that's different there is the system, right? Because if you look at a kingdom is one person that has power deciding what happens.
Yeah.
The Senate does exist at that time. The Senate exists purely to advise the king. King, this is what I think we should do. Are you going to do it? Great, I'm going to do it. Even through all of Rome's history, the Senate actually has no power to pass laws. All it ever does is make recommendations. It's up to people in political power to actually put those things into political action or make them laws. Now, when you get into the republic, what's different? The thing that's different is it's not just one person in charge. The political offices, there's the 2 major political figures every year are called consuls. And they have 2 of them because they don't want one person to have too much power. So every single year, there's 2 new consuls. And Romans also, until the time of Julius Caesar, didn't have a really great system for dating or putting time together. So they would actually mark the year by who was the consul that year. So this is the consulship of Hotep and Jesus. That's the year we were at. But that's how they would do it. They would be the 2 last names of the people that were in charge that year would be how they would mark the year on the calendar.
Okay.
And they do that for, almost 500 years, right? There's also this line of political offices. It's called the Cursus Honorum. And what would happen is you could have your first political office at 35, and then you would climb this ladder of political office until you were eligible to be a consul. But you could not be a consul at a young age. You had to be through this whole line of political offices to actually even do that. So that's how the system works. Now, when people hear about that, they think of a republic in the way we talk about it now. I think the thing that's really important to understand is the way Rome voted for these people. They had I'm trying to think of a way to explain this. They had a assembly that would get together for this voting, and they voted in voting blocks, which if you want to compare it to anything, it's very similar to how the Electoral College works, right? If you win the state of Texas, you get all Texas's votes. So what would happen is all of the people in Rome were broken into what are called tribes. Your tribe counted for 1 vote. there's like I think it's like around 190 different tribes in Rome. Of those, the richest 1% owned 90 of them. So right away, if you weren't a patrician or you didn't have the right political connections, you weren't getting political office. It just wasn't happening. And that's why kind of all through the Republic, you're going to have this pushback between plebeians and patricians, where even early on, the plebeians get this political office called the tribune of the plebs, this person that was supposed to be the person that represented the plebs, because no matter what, a patrician always won. So yes, is it a republic? Absolutely, in the way it functions, but still there's a lot of aspects of oligarchy to it, if you want to look at it that way, where the richest 1% could control a lot of what was going to happen to you on a day-to-day basis.
So now an empire is basically what now?
It is one person in charge doing whatever he wants, whenever he feels like it, at his own whims.
Like Constantine.
Yeah. He's one of the nicer ones. If you compare him to, though he kills his son because he was afraid of his son taking power and things like that. So he's one of the quote unquote nicer ones. There's some much crazier ones out there.
Yeah.
Who's the
craziest one?
Craziest one. That's hard, man, because like I said, you also have like a lot of the historians come from the senatorial class. So if you didn't like the Senate, you weren't going to get power.
Right.
Caligula is often said to be the craziest one.
Mm-hmm.
Because he would do all these different things, like he was going to name his horse Consul, and he was going to. But here's the thing: if you truly read it and truly try to understand Caligula, you kind of realize he was likely just screwing with them, because what he was actually doing was just he was trolling the Senate and trying to embarrass them. Once you read history with that viewpoint, you kind of realize Caligula wasn't that crazy. He just was the ultimate troll.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. Okay, so let's come back to the 5 great elitists, emperors.
Yeah.
How did they choose these people? How did they choose their successor? What were they looking for? Did you have to go into war and have some war experience, or what?
So I think the thing that you have to understand is, in that type of a society, most men were going to war. It wasn't typical that someone wouldn't be. Like it was a prideful thing to have served in war. So they are looking for military service. That's a really big part of it. They're also looking for political experience, because what had been seen as a problem with the Julio-Claudians is you're dumping people that have lived a spoiled life with no political service and giving them ultimate power. Mm-hmm. So what do you think is going to happen? So they were really looking for people that had had some sort of military service, but it also showed competence in working politically. And that's something that works really, really well. Now, do they have like bullet points they're looking for? No, because it's also like, hey, I like this person more, I like that person more. There's a lot of favoritism being shown as well. Or if you look at Hadrian, he adopts Antoninus Pius, and then Antoninus Pius has this son that isn't so great, but he ends up ruling with Marcus Aurelius, and his name is Lucius Verus, sorry. But he ends up ruling at the same time as Marcus Aurelius for his first few years. There's 2 emperors for a bit, because it's literally just a favor to Hadrian, because Hadrian kind of liked the guy. So there is a lot of favoritism being shown in that as well. Trajan very likely was related to Nerva in some way. So there is definitely a lot of favoritism and nepotism, but they are looking at political experience, and they're also looking at military experience.
Now, let's talk about the 1%. The 1% are controlling 90% of the property. So what are some things that they're doing?
Well, before it becomes an empire. Once it becomes an empire, even that 1% are at the whims of the emperor. So in a republic, the richest 1% could kind of do whatever the heck they wanted. But once it becomes an empire, that's going to change dramatically too, because they're also at the whims of the emperor.
Wow. So they didn't have much pull with the emperor, even though they got the cash?
So you have to understand, and I apologize, there's like so many of these different like background pieces to it.
I love it.
In Rome, there's what's called a client system. Today we'd call it political corruption and graft, and we'd be trying to figure out like, who does, XYZ company own, right? In Rome, that was an established system, and everybody knew it. So like, for example, let's say you are Publius Cornelius Hotep, and you are a Roman senator, and you have a lot of money. So there would be all these people that wanted to either be in the Senate or have political positions. They would become what are called your clients, meaning they would do different favors and things for you in hopes that you would do something for them because you had something to give them. But now here's the interesting thing about the client system. They can't go and become the client of somebody else. They are indebted to you and stuck to you. So if they become your client, that relationship is they can't break it and they do whatever you want whenever you want. And if you look at even the way Roman houses were set up, for a lot of the wealthy class, the house was their office. Their clients would actually show up at their house every morning and it's kind of like, what are the orders, boss? What am I doing today? And that's what's really interesting about how the system works. That's how political power works. So if your patron was a tribune or your patron was a consul, that was a really good person to be a client of. So you're always trying to, I guess, saddle yourself to the horse that could one day be famous or already is famous. So I think it's important to also understand that how that power structure works. That carries a lot into the empire as well. So it was a really big deal if you could become a client of the emperor, right? If you could become a client of the emperor, you could get a lot of political positions you weren't qualified for. So I think that's also something important to understand. It's someone's status, and if you were a client of them, also gave you the things you could get or have access to.
So how are they flexing their power before it was an empire?
In terms of like the person or the country or the country itself?
The country itself.
So it changes kind of, if you look at the early republic and the later republic are different. And the early republic, what they do is actually the thing that helps them become what they become. Early on, when Rome conquers an area, they don't conquer it. They create an ally. They basically say, hey, we're not going to do anything to you. We're not going to hurt your political system. What we want is military troops to serve in our army. So what they would do is they had all these places throughout Italy that were called the allies of Rome, and they would send their troops to serve in Rome. And they also had a campaigning season. Like at the certain time of the year, that's when we went on military campaign because the weather's good. So every year those people would send their people and they would serve. And that's how Rome expands. It's going to change, become a taxation system later on. But early on, it's just about sending troops. Now, the thing that changes that, which I very often like to compare to the War on Terror, is the Punic Wars. The 3 Punic Wars actually take the Roman state and militarize it. Before the Punic Wars, Rome didn't have a standing army. It had a citizen army where you were responsible to serve in times of war, and then it would disband. There would typically be a small legions that existed, but for the most part, it was a citizen army that would band together in time of need, disband when wars were over. It becomes a standing army during the time of the Punic Wars, and it becomes a much more militarized state where you even get to the point where Cato the Elder, he would make his speeches on the floor of the Senate, and he would end every speech with Carthago delenda est, or Carthage must be destroyed. Even if he wasn't talking about Carthage. Like, could you imagine, like, we're going to clean the streets, we're going to do this, and Carthage must be destroyed. He would finish every speech like that. The entire state was militarized against Carthage. And it changes Rome. It changes Rome dramatically, and that's when Rome really starts to become a state of conquest. It happens during the Punic Wars.
Let's talk about the Punic Wars and Carthage, because there's a lot of dogma surrounding Carthage. What is the racial makeup of Carthage?
So I will say first and foremost, this is an area that I don't know as much about, so I'll do my best here. If I make any mistakes, apologies to anybody out there. But they would have been actually more, it's North African, but in that time period, it's more Semitic. So they would have been closer to like olive skinned, or they would have been closer to looking like, people of the Jewish descent or something like that. That is what Carthage is during that time period. That's going to change later in history, but in that time period, they really are like a Semitic people. The thing that's interesting about them too is Carthage their main purpose was trade. That is all they wanted to do. If you've ever seen the first movie in the new Star Wars series, the one where they have the Trade Federation, right? That's what you could compare Carthage to. It's literally just a organization set up for trade, and they had this board of trade that every year would decide who are our military leaders, who are our governors, who are going to do these different things. And in Carthage, if a military leader failed, they killed him. That's basically what it looked like. So Carthage was all about protecting the business of Carthage, and Carthage was basically a state of business. That's what you could look at it as.
So it was about getting that paper.
That is it, man. The entire state was set up to make money, and they were quite good at it.
Interesting. Okay. So now take me through the Punic Wars 1, 2, and 3, the differences of them, how they begin, how they end.
So how it starts, and once again, I don't have the entire background on all this, so I'll do my best. How it starts is there's this island of Syracuse, and the Syracusans were actually Syracuse is an island off the coast of Italy. It was a protectorate of Carthage at that point in time. They decide they don't want anything to do with Carthage. Carthage is in North Africa, and they're also in southern Spain at this point in time. So they say to the Romans, hey, Romans, come defend us. And the Romans are like, I guess this looks like a great opportunity to bring another island in. So they come in, and they cause this conflict with Carthage, and that is going to lead to basically the 3 wars. Rome's going to lose the first one. They're going to win the second one and win the third one. After the third one, they burn down the entire city. And it's said that they actually even spread salt on the ground to make sure that nothing grows after that. But they do. I will tell you, though, Hannibal gets damn close to actually defeating the Romans when he comes across the Alps. But that's where Publius Cornelius Scipio is going to get the name Africanus, because he deletes Africa, defeats Africa. And
no, delete is right.
Does right? He does. But that's a big reason, by the way, that as I mentioned, they are a Semitic people early on. They literally like roll over Carthage and destroy it. So a lot of the people that are there are just like deleted, I guess you could say. Is a good way to put it. Yeah.
So the way I understand the history is Hannibal actually gets right to the gates of Rome, and they're like, we ain't coming outside to fight. And that's why he ends up losing.
Well, he gambles on, so this is what he gambles on. He understood the Roman system of, hey, we're the Romans, we're going to conquer you, you're going to send some troops to serve for us, and you're going to be the Roman allies. So his gamble was, he thought when he got into Italy, these allies would just be like, yeah, you're better than Rome, I'll fight with you, and let's all take them out. He gets into Italy, and the allies don't do that. The allies don't give their support to Hannibal, and that's actually the thing that turns it for him. Is he expected when he got over the Alps, there were all these people that were serving with Rome because they had to and they didn't have a choice. It turns out, did they have citizenship or anything like that? No, but they liked the trade routes and they liked the opportunities it brought them, so they didn't turn on Rome. That was the gamble that doesn't work out for him.
Interesting. But they don't actually fight when he gets there, right?
No, he's chased back into Africa. That's kind of where things end.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
His father has the best name, by the way, Hamilcar Barca.
Yeah. Harmel. Yeah. Now, why?
As I said, this is something I'm not as well versed in. But if you get a chance to talk to Alex Petkus, he's Cost of Glory on X. He can tell you every little fact about this war, and it's pretty incredible.
Nice. Now, why does he pull the name Africanus? Where does that come from?
So you would get a name like that for achieving something, right? So as the conqueror of Africa, he's given the name Africanus by the Senate. Just like if you look at Augustus doesn't give himself the name Augustus. He receives that name from the Senate. He's born Gaius Octavianus. Once he's adopted by Julius Caesar, he becomes Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, and he'll later drop the Octavianus. I think it's 23 BC. It's 21 or 23. I think it's 23 BC. The Senate gives him the name Augustus because they want something that has a bit of a religious feel to it and a bit of majesty to it, but doesn't say I'm king. So you could be given a name for conquest by the Senate. So for example, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who's a military commander in the 70s and 80s BC. He's somebody that he takes it's called the cognomen, this nickname, He takes something called Felix. Felix means lucky in Latin, so he gets the name Lucky from the Senate. Or you look at Pompey the Great, right? Gaius Pompeius isn't born with the cognomen Magnus, but what ends up happening is at that point in time, it's when Sulla has dictatorial power over Rome, so he doesn't get it from the Senate, he gets it from Sulla, but he gets his name Magnus from Sulla. It's given to him. So that's how a lot of these names are given.
What does
And
Magnus
he takes
mean?
that just Magnus means the Great. He takes it literally because he's like, hey, I'm the new Alexander the Great. That's kind of Pompey's whole idea.
Yeah, so I'm a chess player. So when I hear Magnus, I'm thinking of Magnus Carlsen. And I'm like, oh, his dad literally named him the Great. That's why he's the greatest chess player ever. This is interesting.
I always, it's funny. I think there was actually I was in a competitive powerlifting for a while. There was a competitive powerlifter named Magnus Carlsen. So I always struggle when I hear the chess player because I'm like, the bodybuilder? What? Anyway.
There's only one Magnus Carlsen, Jeremy. It's like, no.
There's also a Magnus von Magnuson too that lifts trains. It's pretty cool. But anyway.
Oh man. All right, let's come back a little bit.
Yeah.
So we went through the Punic Wars, and I wanted to ask you about Africanus now again.
Yeah.
Because some people argue, they're like, Africa was named after Africanus, and then other people say Africanus was named Africanus because of his conquering of Africa. So the term Africa is an exonym or endonym?
So I don't have the background on that, but I will. As far as I know, like the name was already existing at that time, and so he gets his name from it, as far as I know, right? Because you'd get the name from the place you
conquer, right?
Right. So they wouldn't be naming the place from him. It doesn't make any sense. That's not how Romans did things.
Yeah.
So they would be naming him that to show people he did that. So where the name comes from, I don't know.
Right.
But as far as I know, it was existing already at this time because that's how he gets the name.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's how I understand the history. Because people say, oh, Africa's named after him. I'm like, no, he's
named after Africa.
He's named after Africa, yeah.
Now, where the name comes from, I couldn't tell you. I've never looked into it, but I could tell you that that's where his name comes from.
Yeah, yeah. The name comes from Africa. Apri, I forget what Apri means, but Ika means land. And I forget, I think this is some sort of Berber language where Ika means land and Apri was like the people or something like that. So I forget what it is. It's been a while since I've refreshed those memories. I have a book. I'll share it with you later.
Yeah, I'm always interested in derivation, so that's always up my alley.
Yeah, it's a really, really good book. I got to find it somewhere in my phone.
Here's a fun one. The word inauguration.
Mm-hmm.
Inauguration, it comes from Rome. These people that would, they're called augurs. And what augurs, it's the science of looking at birds and livers. So they'd look at the sky and they'd say, what do the birds say today? Oh, the birds are good. Okay, good. So we're going to put you in office. We're going to inaugurate you. Oh, okay, we're going to take the liver out of this animal. What does the liver look like? Oh, this liver doesn't look so good. Let's check another one. Oh, this liver looks good. Great, you could take office. That's where the word inauguration comes from, is basically these guys looking at bird signs and livers, deciding if someone could, basically do something.
Nice little factoid there for you, chat. Okay, let's talk about the people and their relationship to their governments, right? Because there's some arguments over, like when we deal with anarchists or libertarians, they say, we consider ourselves having allegiance to the people and not the state. What is that relationship between the state and the people, between the various periods? We should probably deal with the empire period. And how do they view their government?
So I guess the thing you have to consider is Rome has a really big relationship with their ancestors, right? So if you walked into someone's home, it would scare the crap out of you because they would have on this wall wax faces of all their ancestors that had died before them, as long as they didn't melt in a previous fire. And there were a lot of fires in Rome, trust me. So to people in Rome, they would do a lot of things because, well, that's what their ancestors did, or they have to honor their ancestors. So that's a big part of how things are done in Rome. I think for a lot of them, government is seen as kind of a crapshoot of how can I get power. I don't know that they had a way of looking at our government like we do. Like I think it's a very just different way of looking at the world. Like your kind of regular poor people, their life wouldn't have changed from the Republic to the Empire. It would have been the same life. For the people in political class, a lot of them were trying to take gambles and see where they could go to, but they were also trying to make sure that they honored their ancestors. It's a big part of what they do. So I think that's important. So if you look at somebody like um, um, Gaius and Tiberius Gracchus, right? They trace themselves to the Scipio family through their mother. And so Tiberius Gracchus, who's this guy that basically tries to take land and do a land redistribution after the Punic War, is doing this because he says, well, I want to honor the memory of Scipio. And what would Scipio have done? So that they're very deadly serious about doing things that would honor their ancestors. So I don't know if that fits as much with how, like in our society, that's not really you can correct me if I'm wrong in that, but I don't think it's really that much of a thing anymore. People are very individualized with what's kind of good for me or what's going to work out. But ancestry was very, very important to the Romans.
I would say it's still like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Like the reverence.
I guess I'm more jaded in a way.
Well, I mean, you've dove deeper into the subject matter than I have, so we're definitely probably looking at it completely different, right? But I look at it as like, people like our founding fathers, right? Like they have this, patrilineal attachment.
You could say that, yeah.
Right.
But here's the difference: is we look at the founding fathers, they would look at our actual fathers. Like that's the point I'm making: is who are the people I'm related to or in my family lineage. It wasn't really about the family. It was about the nation. It was about the people in their actual family lineage. That's what they're tracing, and they could trace it for hundreds of years.
Right. So if we talk about that, then I'm talking about like the amount of power that the Bush family has held for generations, dating back to
you could say that
Germany, and then England, right, and then the Cheneys, right? The Cheneys, and like they're like the Rothschilds. Like it seems like the people.
Okay, you win. I just had a Hotep told you moment.
It just seems like it's still a progression of families, right? You ever read the book America's 60 Families?
I have not, but that's definitely sounds like it's up my alley.
Yeah. So it's basically about the 60 families that run America, et cetera, right? So
that's not much different than it was in Rome, honestly.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It seems like it's not much different than Rome. Mm-hmm. We're still following that same trend. And to me, it seems very natural. Like it doesn't seem unnatural for power to leave a family, right?
Yeah, which if you look at it, that's even why adoption existed like it existed. In Rome, you could adopt a person that was fully adult, name them your son, because you could give them your titles, your money, all of your possessions, because you wanted your family lineage to continue. And if you look at a lot of emperors happened through adoption because they wanted to make sure that there was somebody else to take a name. So they would bring in, like Nero, as I mentioned. Nero is adopted, right? Like his Agrippina is his mother, but Claudius isn't his father. Or if you want to look at Tiberius, Tiberius is not the son of Augustus. I know he's not an emperor, but Julius Caesar is not the father of Augustus, right? He adopts him. It was very typical in this system for people to be adopted. But the weird part is you'd be adopting like a 40-year-old man. That's a little bit weird. But his name would change, right? It would change. And that would be it would continue the lineage.
Mm.
Could you imagine if the Bushes could adopt like adults? That would scare the hell out of me.
Oh my Lord, have mercy. I know some people that would volunteer for that.
They just adopted Liz Cheney.
Marjorie Taylor Greene would probably sign up. I hear this term Greco-Roman. So that means there's some sort of relationship between Greece and Rome. Can you give me a TLDR of this relationship of where these two things merge and how that relationship comes about?
Well, so you have to understand, as far as societies go, so we've talked about these dates with Rome, right? We said Rome's founded as a kingdom in 753, falls as an empire in 476. The heyday of Greece and kind of its top time period is the third and fourth century BC, right? Excuse me, I just swallowed some coffee grinds.
Uh-oh. Don't die on me, man. Although that would go viral, so if you want to, I won't mind.
Yeah, I'm like trying to talk, and there's like coffee grinds in my throat. I love French press, but sometimes it just gets you. But anyway, so the Greek society for the most part is a lot older.
Okay.
The early Republican era, they wouldn't have been super accepting of Greek society, and Romans would have seen it as very like feminine in a way. That changes in what's called the Hellenizing of Rome. Greeks wouldn't have called themselves Greeks; they would have called themselves Hellenes. So we use the word Hellenization to refer to things becoming Greek.
Yeah.
The Hellenization starts around the 1st to 2nd century BC, and it's going to be very complete by the time of Hadrian in the 130s. It's so complete that Hadrian even had a Greek lover at the time. That was in Greek society in that point in time, it was actually seen as very normal for a guy to have a male and female lover. Hey, that's how they did it. Whatever. So that's why the Romans early on saw like being Greek is very feminine, because they called it boy love. Anyway. So the thing that ends up coming when you look at kind of the 1st and 2nd century BC, you're going to have a lot of wealthy Romans. They don't just speak Latin, but they also speak Greek. Like it was very normal to speak Greek. So Greek literature becomes very important. Greek clothing becomes very important, but they're taking a lot of what is Greek and making it Roman. But if you even want to look at, if you read Arrian's campaigns of Alexander, right before Alexander the Great dies, when he's in India, he's talking about this upstart people called the Romans that he's looking to conquer, and he dies in 323 BC. So he never actually does that, but the Romans were not really quite a thing yet, and he was looking to conquer them. So the Greeks are really a much older society than the Romans in terms of their, like, as I said, the Romans are around for a while, but they're not as established until kind of this Republic period. A lot of the kingdom stuff is just kind of, not much of it can be proven. A lot of it's lore. A lot of times, there's this historian I like to read, Dr. Mary Beard, and she looks at the name, the first king, Romulus, and she says he's kind of this Mr. Rome character. So is he just kind of this person that we don't know where all this stuff came from? So of course Romulus did it. Like we do this stuff because it came from Romulus. So the kings become this thing that Romans don't know. They aren't able to attribute different things they do in their society to a person. So they attribute them to kings. That's kind of the interesting thing about it. So the Greeks are much more established much earlier, and Greek culture becomes a very big part of Roman culture. And if you even look at when the empire splits toward the end of the 3rd century, the Eastern Empire is very much a Greek empire, and it's gonna go on for almost 1,000 years after the Western Empire falls.
You got my wheels turning here. Okay.
Well, there's so many rabbit holes you could go down on it.
Yeah, there are many rabbit holes.
Like Jay Dyer and I went down through this one about Constantinople and a lot of the modern stuff you can trace to it. It's very interesting stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So, what was the relationship between Rome and Egypt like?
So,
as far as cultural adoption and stuff like that.
So that goes back to Alexander the Great too. Alexander the Great, as I mentioned, he dies in 323. He doesn't really have a successor. He has a child that's very young and ends up being killed within the first couple years. But in his deathbed, the generals of Alexander, it's funny too, because you read these historical sources and like you have groups of people asking a question, which you're like, I'm guessing somebody said it. This group isn't talking as a group, but that's how historians talk about it. The generals ask him who's going to take over, and he says the strongest. So what ends up happening is these successors of Alexander, they get the name in history called the Diadokoi. And the Diadokoi basically divide up Alexander's kingdom between him. His general Ptolemy takes Egypt and Palestine, a lot of those areas. So Alexander has conquered Egypt. So there's not a pharaoh anymore at that point in time, right? That's kind of the end of the pharaohs. So the ruler of Egypt ends up becoming the Ptolemy. Now, things get a little bit weird because these Macedonian Greeks from the time of Alexander in 323 until the last Ptolemy, which is Cleopatra VII, dies in, I think it's 31 is when she dies, somewhere around there. They intermarry for 300 years. So you can imagine there was probably a lot of weirdness happening there. but they do start to take on some Egyptian ideals and ways of being and things like that. And you get to the end, and Cleopatra is worshiping Isis by that point in time. So not the terrorist organization ISIS, the god ISIS.
Goddess ISIS.
I feel like I have to say that. So if you look at that relationship, then for a period of time, they're competing civilizations. Then eventually you get to 31 BC, and in kind of the toward the end of the Republic, it becomes not a kingdom of Rome, but what's left of the Ptolemaic Egypt looks to Rome for protection, if that makes sense, right?
Okay.
And you have Julius Caesar is actually in Egypt for a bit. He has an affair with Cleopatra. They may or may not have had a son named Caesarion, who is killed by Mark Antony. Mark Antony then goes and has another affair with Cleopatra. This lady was definitely getting around. And toward the end of, and I apologize, I'm taking like thousands of years and reducing them in like 2 minutes.
I love it.
But you look at the end of this Roman Revolution period, which is what causes the end of the Republic. 133 to 31 BC is called the Roman Revolution. The final time period in that is this battle between Augustus and Mark Antony. Julius Caesar's already dead, and they're kind of deciding like who's going to be the person in charge. Mark Antony takes his legions and goes to Egypt. He's having an affair with Cleopatra. Augustus takes this as a great opportunity to tell everybody, look, Antony's went native. He's out there and being very Eastern, and we should really be concerned about this, and this is a big problem. And at that point in time, then you have this whole battle that arises between the two of them. The Battle of Actium is the final battle. And after that point in time, Egypt is going to fall, and Egypt becomes part of the Roman Empire. And until the middle of the 3rd century, almost all the grain of Egypt supplies the Roman Empire. That's how they feed people. Because in Rome, they had a grain dole where they would make sure that everyone had a certain amount to be fed by the Roman government, which becomes very expensive for the government later on, but it all comes from Egypt.
Yeah. And I think one of the senators was hoarding some of the grain. And
that was typical.
That was typical, huh?
That was typical because there would be a master of grain that would kind of decide who got it. There's this crazy emperor. He's a child emperor. He's becomes emperor, I think, at 16. He's dead by 19. But his name's Elagabalus in the 220s or somewhere around there. And he takes his hairdresser and puts his hairdresser in charge of the grain supply. He's this kind of like just really wild guy.
Yeah, it's, from what I remember is famine broke out and then a plague.
Well, that's pretty typical too, though, because there's a bunch of those. There's in the 160s, there's what's known as the Antonine Plague, and 10% of the empire dies during that point in time. You go 100 years down the road, in the 250s, there's another plague where people start dying off, and it actually is going to kill the emperor later on. Claudius Gothicus is his name. So plagues were a continual problem, but also in the background, one of the things that causes Rome to rise, or one of the contributing factors, I'm not going to say it's the only factor, but there's people that like to say there is something called the Roman climate optimum. From around the 2nd century BC to around it's kind of debated where it ends, but around the 2nd to 3rd century AD, there's a time period where it's easier to grow food and easier to feed people. So that is also one of the things that fuels the empire growth. So that is happening in the background. And as I mentioned, Egypt is kind of the breadbasket of the empire. What would happen every year is the Nile would flood, and that water would make the delta very lush and able to grow. And the waters would recede, and they would grow things there. Around the 250s AD, that stops happening every year. And there ends up being less of an ability to grow grain. So grain prices start doubling and tripling. So you have the 2nd century has this inflationary problem from military expansion, but then it's pushed even harder by the ability not to feed people. So it is a massive problem throughout history.
So you talk about inflation, which begs the question about currency and trade, and what does that system look like?
if you're talking about inflation, you have to look at the reason why Romans minted money. They minted money to pay the military. Was the major reason that money existed. And after the death of Commodus in 193, the son of Marcus Aurelius, as I said, I'm not as appreciative of Marcus Aurelius as a lot of people are, but anyway, go post your Stoic quotes and feel good about it. I don't know. But when he dies, the year that Commodus dies, it's called the Year of Five Emperors, because basically whoever can try is trying to grab military power. The final one of these guys is a guy from North Africa. His name is Septimius Severus, and he's going to name himself emperor because he has enough legions. And he's the first of what are called the barrack emperors. Barrack meaning military barracks. So what happens in the 3rd century is, as I mentioned, the purpose that money existed was to pay the military. And then if the military had it, it would be used in trading in other areas, right? But when you can rule by military force, what do you need? More military force. So now this is where the inflationary problem gets really bad, because they start, as I mentioned, about 100 years before, 10% of the empire has died. So you have a lot less men to serve in the legions. They start bringing more barbarian forces to serve in the legions. And then in order to pay them, they start, Septimius Severus actually doubles the amount of money a legionary is paid. And then throughout that time period, it's going to get doubled and tripled again. Well, how do you do that if you can't change the value of money? They start adding other base metals to coins and clipping pieces off of coins. And when you look at inflation, that's really what it is. It becomes less of the thing it is.
Yeah.
If you look at by the 270s in the time of Aurelian, the content of the silver coin is about 5% silver. The rest of it is bronze. And by 284, overall inflation is at 15,000%.
Damn.
And it's driven by clipping money to pay more troops, because the person that has the most troops gets to be emperor. And the 3rd century is absolutely insane, because you have these immigrationary problems and you also have these inflationary problems at the same time. And the interesting thing about that is it's kind of a one hand washes the other thing, right? Because one problem makes the other problem worse. And if you look at, this is the time period I like to compare to kind of modern America a lot of times. I've been kind of jabbering about this for about a year now. Are people raising military forces against each other? No. But do we have continual new people coming in, which are taking part in a welfare system? We do. Are we spending money we don't have? Absolutely. And what happens is, when a currency no longer has value and the people in the state only have buy-in to the system for what it can give them, and it no longer has anything to give them, it doesn't exist anymore. And that's literally how Rome falls. Rome falls because the money no longer has value, and the people really aren't Roman anymore, so they don't care. They're just going to go on to whatever system exists after that.
That seems to be the tale of the tape for many empires and nations.
Yeah.
Because there's even stories of Mansa Musa creating a massive amounts of inflation in Egypt during his visit, when he threw gold coins everywhere. He was just like a baller in a strip club, according to lore. Damn, that's pretty crazy. 15,000% inflation.
But Hotep, here's the part nobody talks about. Like, everybody talks about Constantine being the first Christian emperor. But the thing nobody talks about is he actually puts the East on a gold standard. And he does it gradually year by year from the year 314 until he dies in the 330s. And the solidus, which is the gold coin that they use in the East, it's 95% pure gold. And it's 95% pure gold from when it's minted in 314 until around the year 1000. So it goes for almost 500 years without inflation. So people talk about him being the first Christian emperor as like the big thing that he did, which is true. But at the same time, it's not actually a functional Christian empire until the 380s under Theodosius, but never mind. It's actually about money. Like, a big part of what he does is the monetary system, because fixing that is what fixes a country.
Sidebar, Septimius Severus, is that the African emperor?
So there's debates on that. He was definitely going to be a darker skinned guy. And if you look at the features of a lot of the busts of him, there's a good chance he would have been darker skinned than we believe him to be. But yeah, he would have been the one that be considered to be so. That's why I get upset about the new Gladiator movie, by the way, because Caracalla, who's the son of Septimius Severus, they make him this like blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy with like a grill. I don't know. They gave him like I don't know if you saw. They gave him like these gold or silver teeth or some shit like that.
Mm-hmm. Wait,
And
which character was that?
it was the main character with the blonde hair and the painted face. He wouldn't have looked like that at all in the slightest.
Oh, one of the twins?
Yeah. So the twins are, gosh, so what's Caracalla's brother's name? Because he kills his brother.
Yeah.
What's his brother's name? I don't remember offhand. Because he actually like has his face like removed from everywhere. I'm gonna have to look it up now.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they removed his face. Yeah.
Gata is his brother's name. They both would have like, if anything, they would have looked like Spanish or something like that. Like they would have been like, do you get what I'm saying? Like they would have been, they wouldn't have been blonde-haired, blue-eyed guys with that they made them look like with painted faces. Like Caracalla, he was a military commander, and he actually gets his name from a Spanish cloak he wore called a Caracalla. Like his name wouldn't have his birth name wasn't Caracalla. So I think these movies really bug me, man. Like he was born Marcus Aurelius Antonius. And so Caracalla is just literally just a nickname. Like Caligula is just a nickname. Caligula's birth name was Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus. Caligula, as a child, his father was a general, and they made this little like military outfit for him and these little boots where they'd bring him into the camps. So Caligula, translates to bootykins. Bootykins. So a lot of these nicknames, getting back to Caracalla, like he would have been a military commander. He would have been this like blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy with a grill. Like that's what bugs me about these movies.
So what about the movie did you find was accurate and not accurate? Because I love the new one.
I didn't watch it.
You didn't
I didn't
watch
watch it. I just saw the kind of the previews. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can stomach it.
Oh, I loved it. The plot was amazing.
I'm sure it was a good movie, but as a historian, I get upset.
Did you watch the first Gladiator?
I did. It was pretty good.
How accurate
definitely
was
not
that?
Historically accurate at all in the slightest, but it was good.
What about is not historically accurate? The characters or just
Well, Maximus didn't exist,
right,
and he didn't fight the emperor like that. How Commodus dies is actually pretty funny. Like he was so unliked that they basically they convince his side piece to try and like help kill him, and she tries to poison him, but she gives him so much wine that he throws it all up, right? So he throws up all the poison and doesn't die. So then they bring in a wrestler, and the wrestler just strangles him to death. But they had tried several times to kill the guy. He does not fight a guy named Maximus, in the Colosseum.
No? Damn.
Yeah.
Well, there goes that.
Doesn't happen.
So the other thing in this new movie, they got the Colosseum, right? And they filled the Colosseum up with water, and now they got boats in the Colosseum.
Happened.
What?
That happened. They did mock naval battles. That did happen.
No way.
That did happen, yeah.
How?
I don't know the technology behind it, but I know it definitely did happen.
What? Because I'm watching the movie and I'm like, is this real?
That's real. That did happen.
Wow. Now, according to lore, you about to say something?
No, I was just checking the dates and the different times it happened historically, but it has actually happened.
Oh, okay. According to lore, the Caesar creates these games as a distraction. But I don't think Caesar's the one that created these games.
It existed for a really long time.
Right.
Like the games existed, like there was actually a position. So remember I talked about that, like political positions you would go through before you could be consul. There was a position which was one of the lower ones, where you were actually responsible for creating games for people. Like that was it was a very Roman thing all through the Republic, all through the kingdom, all through the empire. Do the games get bigger? Sure. They definitely get bigger throughout time, but the Circus Maximus is always very, very popular. And then when the Flavian Amphitheater is that we know as the Colosseum is opened in 79, the same year that Vesuvius blows his top, by the way. When that happens, sure, the games get bigger, but it always been a thing that was very Roman. And I think as well, the thing that we're led to believe too is that like guys were just dying all the time. And that also just really wasn't true. There was a very low number of gladiators that actually died in battle. It's just that it kind of sells better in Hollywood. Because here's the thing you have to consider. If you're somebody that you spend all this money in trading these guys to be gladiators, would you really want them to die?
No.
No, you just want to win or lose, right?
I was thinking
So,
about that when I watched the
so
movies.
it's just, were there deaths? Absolutely, there were. Nowhere near on the scale they make it seem like in these movies.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And thumbs up, thumbs down is reversed, by the way.
Really?
It is opposite. Thumbs up
You
would have
die.
been bad, and thumbs down would have been good.
Right. Oh, wow. But I guess nowadays, well, everything is flipped upside down nowadays. Our entire world is upside down world. What about upward mobility for, the average peasant? How do you climb the ranks? Because the way I know the story of Julius Caesar is he comes from a family, a wealthy family, and then they, do something to mess that up. And then he ends up back in the army or as a regular dude, and he works his way back up through the army ranks and then becomes emperor.
That's true, but he had a rich name. And I think that's the thing you have to consider. Like Julius Caesar, he owed money to people his entire career. There's a really, really good book about Caesar called Caesar by Adrian Goldsworthy. It's super long, but if you get a chance to read it, it's very, very good. And Caesar's somebody that his father basically manages to lose the family's wealth in some like speculative investments.
Right.
So then they're living in a poorer area, but they have a rich name. And a name was absolutely everything in Rome. He had a patrician name. So it shouldn't matter they didn't have money, because he had a name, he could still get the positions he wanted. You could have money as a plebeian, but you were still a plebeian. And you could really only ever have certain political positions. So for him, having a name was vital. But if you look at his career, his entire career, he owes money to other people because he's raising money to do different things. Because if you wanted to go in political office, you'd have to raise money to do it. So he raises money to become Pontifex Maximus, or the top priest in Rome. He wins that election, but everything is a gamble for Caesar. So if you look at through his career, a lot of decisions he's making is, if I lose this situation, I'm done. I'm absolutely done. Because I'm going to owe all this money and I have no way to pay it, right? Because he could either pay it or he could do favors for those people now that he was in a bigger political position. So a lot of his decisions are, kind of putting all the cards to the middle of the table, or chips to the middle of the table, and hoping that things work. Yeah, every decision is all in for him. And even the quote from him, "The die is cast." People, it's actually a quote from Greek tragedy, and it more properly would have been said as, "Let the chips fall where they may." Like Caesar was a very professional gambler, and he just turned out to be right more than he was wrong. And at the end of his life, he was just very wrong. And that's what killed him.
What do you mean he was very wrong towards the end of his career? Wrong about what?
So when Caesar becomes dictator in, I think it's 46 BC, he has these famous reforms that he does. First is the Julian calendar. The Roman calendar was missing about 20 days. So every 4 or 5 years, the Romans would add a month because the seasons would be so far off. So he creates a calendar that's closer to what we have now. Fine. He looks at the grain dole. He sees a lot of corruption in it, so he reforms it, makes it better. He also looks at all of the people that had been his enemies during the end of the Roman Civil War. And typically what would have happened is you get power, you kill your enemies. What does Caesar do? He pardons them. So what do? Reorganize. What do? Kill him. So that's the major mistake he makes at the end, is he tries to give clemency, but clemency ends up being his undoing.
Try being a nice guy. Nice guys finish last. Ask Julius Caesar. So you mentioned this thing about names. When you say name, is this like how we talk about it today? Like when you make a name for yourself, the name is the reputation, or is there a specific syntax that's involved with these names?
So Roman names have like several parts to them.
Okay.
And if you want to kind of look at it this way, I think it's a 3-part naming. What is it? I'm gonna give you the exact information here so that I don't mess it up.
Okay.
It's like a praenomen, a cognomen. Because there's making a name for yourself, but there's also a list of Roman names. But they basically have 3 names. It was like their personal name, their family name, and then their clan name. So like, yeah, you could be from the Julian clan, but you're from the part of it that's the Caesars, right?
Okay.
And Romans only had like 5 first names.
Agnomens,
so there'd be like a lot of
cognomens?
there'd be Gaius, there would be Marcus, there would be there's like 5 or 6 different first names, and that's about it. So a lot of times they would be calling people their family name and their clan name.
Okay. Got you. Dre Brow said they were faking their deaths.
Who was?
I know you said they. I don't know. I'm probably talking about some of the leadership probably is faking their death.
There we go. So it's praenomen, which is the first name or given name, nomen, which is the principal name, and then they have after that their like clan name.
Okay. Q said agnomens and cognomens. The gladiator fights? Oh, okay. Oh, the gladiator. He's talking about the gladiator fights. They were faking their deaths. Oh, it's part of the show. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's part of the show. We got to be entertained. You
Yeah.
know? It's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And as I said, like, do I know absolutely everything about Rome? No.
No.
But I know a lot about kind of the history and where it goes, and I definitely am honest with people when I don't know something. Like naming is actually one out of my area of expertise.
You know more than I do. So, what do people get wrong about Rome today?
Oh, that's a very open question.
Yeah, it is. Or I should say that annoys you most when people
That
talk about
annoys
Rome.
me most.
Yeah, like people say there's something about Rome, and you're like, no, that's just not true. That's not, the perception of Rome.
I think it's more the comparisons people make. That's what tries to bug me. Do you know what I mean? Because I think like, you remember when we went to the mall in the 80s and they had this map and it'd be like, you are here. And I'd be like, okay, great. I got to get to Sears and it's over there. People tend to look at history like that. And they look at the Roman era as in like that. It's not a roadmap of you are here, right? Like, I think it's more of these are things that we notice in history, see them, and we try not to make these same mistakes. But it's not like we're going through an evolution, right? And that's why a lot of times I'll compare where we are now to Rome 3rd century. But at the same time, as I said, there's a lot of things that aren't the same. So the thing that bugs me is especially where people try to talk. There's been a lot of talk in the last year or so, and it's been pushed on both sides of the aisle, left and right, that Donald Trump is Julius Caesar. And I'm like, guys, first of all, Julius Caesar was one of the best military commanders of his time. Trump has never led a military. That's one part of it.
Yeah.
But the other part about it is like, you don't understand how your country functions. Like America hasn't been a functional republic in almost 100 years, right? Like I think that's a big part of it. Like 1913, in my opinion, is the last time America was a functional republic. So that's the really big thing that bothers me is people kind of pick and choose what's useful to them as a point of comparison to scare the hell out of people, rather than looking at, okay, what's useful and what can we learn here? People tend to approach it with the result they want already in mind, rather than what things look similar enough so I can learn from them and not make the same mistakes.
Wait a second. You're going to piss off the woke right, bro. You're going to piss them off.
I have already pissed off the woke right, man. Why? Because I don't think fires had anything to do with DEI. That's why. I'm in California right now, by the way. I'm 1 block off of where they were the Hollywood Hills fire they were going to evacuate they evacuated some of it on, was it Tuesday or Wednesday night?
Yeah.
I was the next house that they were going to evacuate.
Oh,
And
wow.
we ended up not having to go because they got that fire out. So, I've been here for a bit. I've kind of seen what's happening. It's just poor wildlife management, man. It's poor forest management. It's poor government policy. It literally has nothing to do with DEI, but the woke right loves it, man.
So it has nothing to do with 3 lesbians?
No?
They said it's the 3 lesbians and the black mayor. And I'm like,
Who cares? You could trace most of it to Newsom that changed the environmental policies, and he's a white dude. Like, if you look at it, was it since I was listening to somebody talk about this the other day. There's been more fires since 2016 than like the 50 years before that,
Mm.
because they changed policies so drastically after that time period. That's a state policy. That's not like the mayor of LA has nothing to do with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel bad for her, man. They done threw her in that spot.
Management hasn't been great, but at the same time, it's already started. So what are you going to do?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, obviously her tenure has not been exemplary, but at these fires, I'm
She
like,
hasn't been in office that long, has she?
I think this is her first stint.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you said America hasn't been a republic since 1913. Why would you say something that is abhorrent?
I upset a lot of people too. Well, and here's why I say that, right? The Senate and the House of Representatives serve two different purposes, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Senate is supposed to represent the states.
Okay.
The House of Representatives represents the people.
Yeah.
In 1913, the big thing that changed in the 17th Amendment is the senators were changed to popular election. So now the Senate and the House and the House both represent the people, and no one represents the states. Now, they were trying to solve an actual problem that was happening at the time. There was graft in government where the state legislature was naming somebody they owed something to senator. I think instead of changing how it functions and the purpose of it, you fix that problem, right? Like fix that problem rather than changing how it functions.
Oh, wait, hold on.
Now,
I'm lost.
Yep.
How did they pick senators before?
the state legislature would select them. So like in 2020, for example, when they were kind of fighting over like who's president or who won or whatever it might be, if you remember the hearings that they had, in order for a congressperson to say anything about it, they also have to have a senator first be willing to speak up.
Okay.
If there's no senator willing to speak up, the congressman about a vote like that doesn't get to speak. So what ends up happening is the state legislatures were pretty upset about this. They were the ones having these hearings and things like that. But they didn't put the Senate in place. And the way the Senate would work is the state legislatures has the hearings. They've picked the senators. So the senators are going to raise the problem and then Congress can talk about it. But right now, state legislatures have no representation. So what's actually happened is it's pushed us to more of a pure democracy, away from being a republic and just a way it functions.
So
Because now the state that has the most people is the state that wins. Whereas if you look at the way the Senate works, every state has 2 representatives, right? Every
Right.
state has 2 senators. So that meant that California could say just as much as New Jersey could, or just as much as Vermont could, or whatever. But now it's all popular vote. So states don't have a voice, just people do.
So what was broken with the system before?
What was happening is there was a lot of graft in state legislatures.
What's graft?
So, like corruption.
Grifting.
They'd be grifting.
They
right?
was griffing. Oh shit.
So somebody owed something to somebody else and he would become a senator.
Gotcha.
That was the problem. So instead of fixing that problem, they broke the system. Do you get what I'm saying? Like the purpose of the 17th Amendment was to fix corruption that was already occurring, but instead they broke the system by doing that.
So the system then became, we'll let people vote for the senator.
Correct. Which was not the case before. So that because they would be the senators were meant to be the representatives of the states. So each state could have a voice as well as the people could have a voice.
I see what you're saying. So the people
now
select
everything's
the
just the people's
House.
voice.
People select the House. The state legislators select the Senate, and their voice was heard through the Senate.
Correct.
When you move it to popular vote, the people now control the Senate and the House.
Correct. So states lose a voice. Like you look at like a state with low population.
I see what
like,
you're saying.
Nobody gives a crap what Oklahoma has to say, right? Because it doesn't matter.
Yeah. This is quite a conundrum because
But there's a lot more that happens that year too, right? Like there's also the income tax passes that year, and the Federal Reserve Act passes right over the Christmas holiday of that year. So it goes into effect in 1914. So those 3 major things, like a country no longer has sovereignty of its money, right? And then the people no longer have the sovereignty of the ability to use their money. So a lot happens in that year, and people call me crazy when I talk about this, but like, dude, it's a really big thing to look at historically.
now what the money got to do with being a republic?
We don't control our own money; somebody else does. Like if you don't have control of your money, well, that's a huge problem. So it's a republic would have their own money that they could control, right? They could have their own currency they can control. We don't control it.
Who controls it?
Have you ever gone down the rabbit hole of the Federal Reserve? It's fun.
I may have.
So the Federal Reserve is owned by a bunch of what are called member banks. And if you dive into that, that's like JP Morgan Chase and all these other banks, they own shares of the Federal Reserve.
Mm-hmm.
It's not federal and it has no reserves. It's just as federal as Federal Express.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to go even deeper down that rabbit hole, all of the individual central banks around the world are all owned by the Bank of International Settlements or the BIS in Basel, Switzerland. So like most countries don't control their money anymore, man. It's just like it's the banks own the central banks so that they can kind of take all these risks and then just kind of shove more money. You look at the Silicon Valley Bank, right? When that fell last year.
The who? The Silicon? Oh, SVB?
Silicon Valley Bank when that collapsed last year.
And First Republic?
Yeah, because they would take all these risks and then they could go to the Fed window, which is the lender of last reserve, where they could actually get money to handle the problems if things happened.
Yeah.
They got to the Fed window and the Fed wouldn't give any money. But that was pretty typical for them to be able to do that. So banks were just basically taking their own bets and hedging their bets, man. And if they own the system, then what are you going to do? I know this is a whole other can of worms, so I apologize for opening that one, but what are you going to do?
No, this is fucking wonderful information. So a republic also has to control their money.
Right, because if you are subservient to someone else, do you really have any control of your own country?
Damn. You cooking, Jeremy. You chefing up right now, Jeremy. Oh my God. So the Federal Reserve is cooked up, right? Who cooks up the Federal Reserve? Like how does that even become a thing?
There's a book by G. Edward Griffin called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And it's basically I forget which families it is at that point in time, but it's a bunch of the richest banking families at that time.
JP Morgan.
There was one of them, yeah. They go to this place called Jekyll Island, and it was one of the families that owned Jekyll Island. I don't know which one it is.
It's JP Morgan owned the mansion. JP Morgan? He owned the mansion
there we go.
And the train that they took to get there.
Yeah, so they all go there using fake names, and they basically create what is the Federal Reserve Act.
Off the coast of Georgia.
Yeah, and they basically create what is the Federal Reserve Act, and that is how we get our current system.
Yeah.
And it passes over the Christmas holiday when there's nobody there to really vote on it.
Yeah, Congress is away. Yeah. So this is quite a conundrum because you tell people about their government, right? And how this thing actually doesn't even exist, this concept of America. I'm like, yo, America doesn't even exist anymore. Like we got to just let this thing go. It's like, it's long gone. Forget about it, right? Chase was there too. But it was mostly Morgan interests at Jekyll Island. If the Republic doesn't control their money, how do you compare that to Rome? Would you say Rome was more in control of their money now? Was Rome more in control of their money than we are now?
To a certain standpoint, yeah. Like I think that was one thing, even as their empire is falling, it's something that they had that we don't have, right? Because it was, as I mentioned, Constantine, if he didn't have control of the money, couldn't save the money. Like the problem is there's not a lot we can do about our money because the Federal Reserve controls it. And at the same time, there's never been a successful audit of the Federal Reserve, right? That's the thing Ron Paul's been banging the drum about for years. Let's audit it and see what's in it. We don't even know what their books look like, which is insane. So a Roman emperor, even though they were inflating the money, like they knew what they were doing to inflate the money. They knew that they were doing that.
Yeah.
And the problem is there's not a lot we can do to fix that.
So I believe it was the Byzantium when they fixed their currency, right? Wasn't that the Byzantine
So it was
Empire?
the Eastern Roman Empire, because it splits in the around 305,
Right.
and they're going to start to become separate civilizations over time.
Right.
Theodosius in the 380s is one of the last to rule over a united Roman Empire, and then it kind of has its full split by the end of his rule,
Right.
under his sons. They do fix the currency under Constantine in 314.
Right,
He institutes
Constantine.
this new solidus coin.
Okay.
And it's 95% pure gold.
Mm-hmm.
He does a few coins every single year. It's not like the thing people need to understand, which I think is interesting about this. I just wrote a thread about this recently. I'll have to send it to you. But the thing that he does, which is a little bit different, is he mints a few coins every single year. Because he's also converting the empire to Christianity, so he's also taking the pagan temples, taking that gold and melting it down.
Mm-hmm.
So now he's getting coins into circulation.
Right.
So the problem they had previously is people would get pure gold coins and they would hoard them. So what does Constantine do? He requires all taxes to be paid in gold. So then what happens is that forces gold to be what's traded among the regular people because, well, that's what they need to have in order to pay their taxes. So he does a few coins every year. So by the time he dies in the 330s, it's on a full gold standard. And by the way, the name Byzantine is given to that place in the 16th century by historians after the fact, but they would have called themselves Romans.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's come back to the Republic.
Sure.
How were senators selected in Rome?
Senators?
Yeah.
Senators weren't voted for. They were selected by the Senate. You had to come from a senatorial family, and then you had to have already had political office, and then you could be selected into the Senate.
So political office, what was that called? Was it a House of Representatives? Was it Parliament?
Cursus honorum, like that, like basically that upward mobility of like different political offices. You had to have already held political office.
And how many senators did they have?
That changes like dramatically throughout
Really?
history. It changes dramatically. You know, there's a few hundred, then there's hundreds, then you get above 1,000.
What?
Then Julius Caesar's going to cut a bunch of them out. Then Augustus is going to create a bunch of new ones. So the Senate is constantly changing. Because what
Thousands?
Caesar's going to do is he's going to remove a lot of people that weren't his supporters and fill it with new people that are his supporters. And then Augustus is going to do the same thing. So it changes dramatically throughout the time where it's gonna get above 1,000.
Damn.
It's hundreds and then much larger.
Okay. Now let's come to America, right? I'm trying to understand the complexities of this all because you said that
Sure.
state legislators pick the senators, right?
Well, I wouldn't compare our Senate as much to theirs. Like it serves a different function.
No. I'm just dealing with this separately. Dealing with this separately, right? I'm trying to understand this because this is the white man's country, so I need you to teach me how this shit works, all right?
I'm only trying to understand as much as I can, man.
I'm trying to figure out where there is not room for corruption, right? Because if the people select the Senate, then the Senate represents the people. How is that not good? Because at the same time, the people select the state legislators, but if they're corrupt and they pick the wrong senators, like there's a lot that could go wrong here. Like it seems like both systems are somewhat flawed, right?
Both systems are somewhat flawed, but I think the problem is with everything being popular vote, changes are a lot faster, if that makes sense. Because who's ever going to give you the most stuff is who's going to get in the office fast.
Okay.
And that's what ends up happening in the late Roman Republic. Like one of the major reasons it changes so dramatically is whoever's becoming consul or whoever's getting political offices, it just becomes purely about who can give me the most stuff. So there'd be people like paying them on their day to vote, or there'd be people checking their ballots to make sure they actually voted correctly and things like that. One of the things that they do as well is in order to vote, there was like a bridge you had to cross. They made the bridge smaller so that they could only go through single file and people could check their ballots as they were going through. And they would have these street gangs that would be outside the ballot boxes to make sure you voted correctly. So you're correct. It does become a difficult position to come into because corrupt people continually like to get into political positions, right? Because it's how they're able to kind of take care of themselves. But I think set up how our government was originally set up, you at least got a better shot. Am I saying it's perfect? No.
No.
But what I'm saying is I think changes can be a lot more dramatic and a lot faster in our current way of setup, where you could have one election change the entire country, which is typically what happens, right? It's all the red guys come in or all the blue guys come in.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, because of the sway of the people?
Correct. How are the people feeling at that point in time about the last person that was in office?
Right.
And it's typically based on things that the president doesn't even control, right? Like, how are gas prices? Well, shouldn't really matter that much. Like, business should be business, right? Like, but the things people base their decision on, they change so fast. And that's why you look at, we either have somebody that has 2 terms or somebody has 1 term, or we go back and forth. And we had Trump, then we didn't have Trump, and we have Trump again, because it goes based on the winds of how people feel, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at it, the House is going to change a lot. And when our framers put the country together, they wanted the House to feel more like jury duty rather than what it's become. The Senate would be something that wouldn't change all that much. It would be something that would be pretty, like, people would come in and out, but like it would be based on the makeup of the state legislature. So it'd take longer to change. So it'd have you a little bit more stability.
I see what you're saying.
Would it be perfect? No, it absolutely be perfect. There's still room for corruption.
I see what you're saying. You're saying because the state legislatures don't change that much, the decision making of who the senators wouldn't change as much.
Correct.
And that wouldn't drastically change the face of politics in America as quickly.
Well, and that's what we've seen over the last 100 years, right? It's just like change. We don't like the last guy. And a lot of times what popular opinion is basing their voting on isn't even like what the president actually controls.
Right.
Like, if you look at, the last bunch of presidents, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, the number of executive orders that they've passed, the president isn't supposed to do that at the scale that they've done it. And they've done it more than any other presidency. Like, I think the one that really started it was George W. Bush. What's happened is we started to get this like imperial presidency here in America. And it doesn't matter what political office it is, where they're just deciding things by their own dictate. And that's not how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to have 3 co-equal branches of government, not somebody just doing whatever they want by executive order, which is what's started to happen here.
So what were some of the political decisions that you would say were drastically changed Rome, or
there were a few. Like, one is definitely the change of the republic to an empire.
Okay.
And Augustus does that in an interesting way. Because if you look at the kings are ended because the final king is kicked out of the city, and then he may or may not be assassinated. We don't know if that actually happens. But Romans hated kings because of how the kings were to Rome. So he knows if he declares himself king, he's going to upset a lot of people. So he takes this position. The top position in the Senate was known as the Princeps Senatus, or the Prince of the Senate. So he takes this title. I'm the Princeps Senatus, and that's where we get our modern word prince from. He becomes the prince of the city. So that's where he gets this idea from. So that's a major change. That's a major political change. And that changes how a republic functions, how an empire functions. This new position starts to build. He'll start to gradually give himself power. A few positions that really matter is the first, he gives himself tribunician power from the tribune of the plebs. He also gives himself the top general power in Rome, or imperator power, and that's where the title emperor comes from. So he merges a lot of these powers to create his political position. Now, if you want to go further down the road, in 212, Emperor Caracalla, who we were talking about earlier, he's trying to solve the fact that Rome is running out of money. So how does he want to do that? In Rome, when you died, they would tax your inheritance, and Rome could get a certain amount of it. So what does he do? He takes 30 million people in 212 and overnight gives them citizenship, because he's looking at them as a new tax base. But that changes the empire dramatically, right? Because now you have new people you have to feed, and you have all these new people that are just citizens of your country. Now, the thing that's important to understand, there's 2 types of citizenship in Rome. There's citizenship with the vote and citizenship without the vote. So this is citizenship without the vote, but it dramatically changes the makeup of the empire. So that's a big political decision. Also, as well, if you want to move further along, In 313, um, Constantine passes what's called the Edict of Milan. And a lot of people have the idea of the Edict of Milan wrong. They think it makes Christianity the official religion of Rome. It doesn't. It just makes it legal because before that standpoint, it had been legal. In 380, under Theodosius, it becomes the official religion of Rome, but it just becomes legal in 313. So if you want to look at political positions, these are a lot of, obviously we could go into a lot more, but these are the biggest ones in my opinion.
Shout out Nerd Nash. What up, man? Yeah, we working. Got that big brain griff on a Saturday. Playoff Saturday. We here, baby. Immigration. Wow. For a tax base. It reminds me of America a lot.
Well, it's short-sighted decision-making, right? Like they're making decisions for what rewards us now rather than where does this go?
Yeah. What should they have done instead of, if they wanted to raise money, what do you think they should have done? Conquered more territory?
Stop spending money like a drunken sailor. Like that's one part of it. Like that's the problem is as I mentioned, they were enlarging the military, right? They were enlarging the military to continue to get power. And that's a problem that once it starts snowballing, I really don't know what you do about that, right? Because it's going to continue to get worse. But that's really what it comes down to is they needed to stop fighting each other and stop enlarging the military because the military basically eats the country.
So they had a military spending problem.
They did, and that's what kills it.
Wow, sounds like America. Immigration, failure of the republic, a military spending problem. Oh my God, we are literally repeating history. This is
as I said, like I don't think history repeats, but I think it does rhyme. Like there's a lot of the same mistakes that we make, and we do them over and over again.
I think it's planned. I think it's done. I think it's done on purpose. What lessons do you think we can draw as Americans from this past civilization, this past empire of Rome, that is some of the biggest mistakes that they made that we probably should not repeat? And maybe I'm being redundant here because we covered a bunch of that already. But does anything come to mind?
Well, I think the big one is currency. Like you need to handle your currency because if a country doesn't have a solid currency, you don't have a country anymore. You don't, because that is the thing. Like if you don't have a currency, you don't have a country. And sure, there's a lot of things we could look at because, the immigration issue that they had in Rome, there's so many pieces to that as well. Like I think just to say like, oh, it was just barbarian invasions isn't quite true as well, because what Rome was doing is they were is you had tribes running away from other tribes. So Rome said, okay, you can have some territory to settle. And they said, you know what? We changed our mind. You don't get the territory to settle. So they're breaking their promises to people they were letting into the empire. So now you're upsetting the people that you were trying to help. So now you're creating enemies, right? So there's so many different pieces to
Wait, what happened?
They were giving tribes areas to settle in Rome.
Giving tribes areas to settle in Rome. Okay, I get that. Okay.
In the is it 376 is the Battle of Adrianople? I think it's somewhere around there. They basically decide, okay, well now I know I think it's the Huns that are coming down at that point in time. Like I know you're afraid of the Huns, but we actually aren't going to help you. They start breaking their promises to what they're going to provide these different tribes that are coming in. So they upset them. And that ends up being one of the major things that's going to lead to the sack of Rome in 410. So I think to say it's just letting people into a country is that you're not looking at it for all the nuance that's there, right? There's broken promises. There's an over-militarized need for troops. There's different things going on. There's also a problem that they were having is one day you would be a barbarian soldier, the next day you'd be a Roman soldier, right? There wasn't a lot of allegiance to why people were serving. It was just the coin they could serve for.
Right.
And that goes back to the money problem, right? So you need to it's currency, man. Like currency will fix just about every problem in your country. Not every problem, but a good deal of them.
So basically what I'm gathering from this is that you're pro H-1B visas.
In low numbers, you know what I mean? Like because people are going to get really upset about this because here's the thing you have to consider is our education system has screwed us for a really long time and we haven't done a lot about it. So we don't have some of the workers we need. So we do need some tech workers and things like that. Now, we don't need people for 7-Eleven. We can do that here. But I do think we need some amount of H1s. And I think to say that we don't because we need to be America first, like, sure, we should be America first, but it doesn't mean we should also fall behind. You know what I mean? It's a
Mm.
compromise, man. I think to go totally one way doesn't make sense either.
Mm. So what was education in Rome look like? Did they have public education or?
It was pretty privatized. It would be like whatever the family could afford. And a lot of times what was happening is, as I mentioned, Greek culture was really important. So the way the slavery system would work in Rome is if you lost to Rome, you could become a slave of Rome. And typically, if you were a Greek slave of the Romans, you'd become an educator. So you'd become kind of the household education person. Like Polybius, who's one of the famous Roman historians, was a Greek slave of a family that was also their teacher. So that was how the slavery system worked in Rome and actually worked as part of education.
So if you were poor, you just didn't have an education.
Likely, yeah. There wasn't a public education system for it. Your family would have to afford it for you.
And what percentage of the population would you say was this underclass?
50, 60%, if not more.
So 50, 60% of the population can't read at an 8th grade level. That also sounds like America. Interesting. So how did the government view the importance of education? Is this something that they wanted to hoard for the upper class? Because I remember Aristotle having this discussion with Alexander, and Alexander's basically saying we need to educate our people, et cetera, et cetera. And Aristotle's like, no, you don't. You don't want them smart because smart people are going to take away from your power. Was there any hoarding of knowledge, or was it just, you could afford it, you could afford it?
Yeah, I don't really know about that. As far as I know, is if you could afford it, you could afford it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there was any, like, I'm sure there was some diabolicalness to it on an individual basis. I just don't know if it was a groupthink thing.
Okay. So education was privatized. Interesting. Okay. What's wrong with the education system in America?
Well, I live in New Jersey and we just got rid of literacy testing. So, you know what I mean?
What do you mean they got rid of literacy testing? What does that even mean?
So in New Jersey, they're getting rid of having to pass a literacy test and a math test to like graduate. And California, I believe, had done that a few years ago. So it's, I guess the problem is, man, like we're passing people through to pass people through, and we need to actually have people that are capable of doing something. So I think the problem with our education system is it's become less and less and less about results. And I think that's the problem. Because even look at me, like, sure, I got lucky and started a business, but like I don't have a degree that was very useful.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it's not
Yeah.
you're not going to go out and get a job with a history degree. They just kind of laugh at you.
Yeah.
So I think we do need to find more useful ways to use our education. I think it's a lot more in math and science, but I think also our college system has to change dramatically too, because it's become a lot about easy money loans and putting people in debt for the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not coming out with a skill that can actually produce something with.
Yeah. Damn. So the labor shortage, you're saying short term, we import skilled labor. Long term, we overhaul our education system.
Yeah, because I think, in my opinion, that fixes both, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's become such a divisive issue where one side is like, only this way, and the other side's like only that way. But I think it's actually a little bit of both, man. I think if you just kind of look at it as, okay, we need to make sure we have the right technology, because technology kind of is at the moment the direction the economy is going. But at the same time, our education system is somewhat worthless. We're one of the least advanced of the kind of the top nations in the world right now. You look at most of the Asian countries are ahead of us. So it's like we're not really doing enough here to worry about what can people do.
What exactly are we competing on, though? Like, this is what I fail to understand.
Testing scores is the big thing they're looking at. And I know that isn't always the best.
But I mean, in the global marketplace, right? Like when we talk about economics, right? And America being an economic power, we don't even produce shit.
And that's the problem too. That is 100% the problem too. We don't produce anything here. And we've become just a service nation. And I think that is a big issue as well. So our economy is based on a lot of other countries. So this problem is multiple fold, man. We need to figure out how to bring a lot of production back here as well. I think that is a big problem because then there should be more jobs and things, but there aren't here.
And another thing is, I struggle with this whole situation of competing in technology. And I'm like, we're trying to compete on a level of technology, but at the same time, that's the same technology that's destroying us. So it's like we're competing to see who can destroy their nation faster.
It is a double-edged sword, my friend. It's a double-edged sword.
All right, let's think about what we're competing on, right?
Yeah.
Motor vehicle manufacturing.
We don't make it anymore.
Okay, so we're losing that, right?
We like I know Volkswagen does all their production in Mexico now, so it's like
they've been in Mexico for a minute. Okay, and that's a German company. All right, so we're not winning that race.
We don't make any chips here. Those are mostly made in Taiwan.
The chips are made in Taiwan. Okay, so what is it that we produce? TikTok videos?
Well, for another 9 days, yeah.
Till Trump comes in and swats it.
No, it's the 19th was when the congressional ban goes through. It just went to the Supreme Court yesterday, and they upheld the ban.
Did they?
Yeah.
So it's definitely going away.
They're trying to do it before Trump gets in, so I guess so. We'll kind of watch the play and see how it goes.
I'm ready to watch TikTok, dog.
I don't use it, man, and it's not because I had anything against it. It's just like it doesn't have the content I like.
It's trash.
It's too like fast. You know what I mean?
It's.
I like long movies, 3-hour movies.
You ever been on there?
I have an account, but like I just post stuff. That's about it.
It's a scary place. One time I went on there, and one time I went on there because I used to do mobile app marketing. So every once in a while I get intrigued. I'll download something and just try to figure out what's going on and how they're marketing it and UI, UX bullshit. And I swiped right one day. And when you swipe right, you end up in this live world. And there's people doing lottery scratch-offs. Yeah. It's a very strange place. And then you got the NPC shit, right? You ever see the NPC stuff?
No.
Oh, God. You don't want to know. It's people basically acting like computer non-player characters. This is what's going on TikTok. It's a very strange place. I want to see it go. Where do you land as far as political ideology? Would you describe yourself as a Republican, Democrat?
Dude, I struggle with that. Like, so I was born with my parents always had like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity playing in the house.
Okay.
And then in 2003, I discovered Glenn Greenwald and my brain broke.
Okay. Why did
he
break
wrote
your brain?
He wrote a book called How Would a Patriot Act?
Uh-oh.
And it breaks down all the different pieces of the Patriot Act.
Mm-hmm.
And it destroyed my entire reality.
Oh, shit. Here we go.
And I don't know, man. Like, because I think red team, blue team is a trap. I really do. I think it's a trap because I like, have I voted Republican most of my life? Sure. Would I call myself a Republican? No. Because I think at the same time, yeah, I don't know how to classify myself, man. Like, because I'm not a libertarian.
That's good. That means you got common sense. You ain't got to say no more. It means you got common sense. You're a common sense.
Well, because here's the thing. Like, if I look at it, do I agree with everything a party says? No.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know how to classify myself. Like, because if I look at it, like, even like, okay, so abortion, right? Where most conservatives would say like no abortion ever. Well, I think in most cases, no. But if it's going to affect the life of a mother or something like that, or let's say, that poor woman was a rape victim and the rest of her life she has to look at that poor child and how that child's going to get treated because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that might be a situation where that has to change, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's not a Republican viewpoint, right? But at the same time, do I think we should legalize drugs? No, I don't. Well, that doesn't put me on the other side of the fence. So I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't know where to put myself. I look at an issue and I decide if it makes sense to me.
Yeah. George
and it makes it hard in this country.
Yeah. George Washington said, stay away from the dual parties.
Yeah. He said that to not have political parties.
Yeah. Yeah. And here we are. Everybody's feuding, blaming DEI for fires. So Rome didn't have political parties?
So they had what are called the populares and the optimates. Populares meaning supporters of the people, and optimates meaning supporters of the Senate. So it was kind of like
A House
you
and
voted for the
Senate.
rich people, you voted for the poor people. Like, what are you doing?
Okay.
Like, why are you doing this? But then you'd also have people like Julius Caesar he should be an optimate because he's a patrician by birth, but he was a populare because he saw giving people things to the people as a way to get power. So there's just it's a very kind of interesting political system where the people they were all people with money that were deciding if they were for the rich or for the poor, and they were just kind of deciding like, can I use the poor or not use the poor? Are they useful to me? Like that's just as sad as it kind of is.
Okay. So you say if the money's messed up, you don't have a republic.
Correct.
So
Well, you don't even have a country at that point, really. Somebody else controls you. You have a corporation, which you are a branch of. Where they like the United States of Microsoft or something like that.
Jeremy, you know why that's so hilarious to me, man? I think it's absolutely hilarious to hear somebody else say it. Because I always tell the audience, they'll be like, yo, America don't exist. And then people are like, what are you talking about? We're a republic and this. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And then you come on here like, I'm like, so you don't have a republic? And you're like, no, you don't have a nation. And I'm just like, oh shit. He's saying me to me. That's freaking hilarious.
Well, and I think people can go too far down that rabbit hole of like, did you read this document and the United States is in capital letters here and it's not in capital letters here? Like, I think there's definitely some rabbit holes that could pull people in. But I also just look at it logistically and like how things function. Like I look at function over a lot of things. And if you can see how it functions and if it's not functioning the way it should and you can see what's broken and you have some ideas about it, well, there you go.
If you were emperor of Rome, how would you, taking all the lessons that you learned, how would you operate Rome? Would you reduce the Senate, keep the Senate, get rid of it? Would you be empire dictator? How would you operate that place?
I would reduce the Senate to a decent number, several hundred.
Okay.
I would not name my spoiled son to be the next emperor. It would be a really bad move.
Okay.
I would make sure people had enough games to keep them happy, but not too many games to be drunk all the time. I would reduce the grain dole to an amount where just the people that needed to be fed were fed. What else would I do here? We're gonna make Rome great again. I don't know.
Make Rome great again.
I think that's about it, man. As well as I think like in the mid 2nd century, it became like a very divisive thing to have sacrifices to the emperor because they started arresting religions that wouldn't do it. So I probably wouldn't do that either. That would probably be a bad idea.
What do you mean sacrifice? What does that mean?
So in the middle of the 3rd century, when kind of the SHIT is hitting the fan, there's this emperor named Decius, and they're experiencing a really bad plague. They're experiencing climate change, and they're experiencing barbarian invasions. So they kind of think their world is ending. So they decide the way they're going to handle this is by making everybody living in the empire sacrifice to the emperor in honor of the gods.
Sacrifice what?
Animals, food.
Okay.
Likely not people at this point in time, where we've kind of advanced past that.
So you got to kill a goat to make the gods happy.
Yeah, that or give them some food that they're never going to eat. Like, how would they deal with that? Like, if they gave food to the gods and it's like rotting in a week, like how would you? Like, yeah, they ate it. It was great. But like they would make these sacrifices, and it became like by law, and that was one of the big times that like a lot of Christians were put to death for not sacrificing to the emperor. You had to get basically a piece of parchment that says you sacrificed to the emperor. Like it was something that Decius does, and I think it's around 249 or 250. And what do you know? It doesn't fix their problems. So that was a kind of a bad move.
Who's your favorite out of Rome?
Favorite out of Rome? I feel like it makes me feel like a bad person to say Caesar, but I think he's a very interesting guy.
I love Caesar.
He's a maniacally intelligent, interesting, and kind of evil person, but he's very interesting.
I always tell people I'm the next Julius Caesar. You know what I mean? It's like as a joke, because I just think he has the most interesting storyline. And he's very savvy about how he, gains power and how he moves. I'm like, yo, this guy's he's like an evil genius.
Well, if you read about him in the Pirates, that's even interesting. Have you read about Caesar and the Pirates?
What?
As like a teenager, he's like captured by these pirates, and like he's hanging out with them, he's drinking with them, and they're like not gonna let him free because they're trying to get a ransom for him. And he goes, one day I'm gonna have all of you killed. I'm gonna have all of you killed. So he manages to get free from the pirates. The pirates get captured, and he tells the Senate he wants them put to death. And the Senate's like, we're not gonna do that. So he manages to figure out how to get control of what happens to them, and he gets them put to death. Caesar kept his promise to the pirates and got them killed.
And who are these pirates? It's just random ragtag bunch of dudes.
They were just like Northern
up.
African pirates just kind of going around. And that's why it becomes a theme through the late Republic. Like Pompey's often fighting the pirates and Sulla's often fighting the pirates, and Caesar gets captured by the pirates. But there's kind of just a theme in the late Republic that's going on.
And about how old was he when he got captured?
He was a late teenager, early 20s when he gets captured.
Oh, okay.
So he's kind of this very young man.
Young man. Okay, all right.
That was right after the time of when he was supposedly the bottom for a local king.
Interesting. I'm gonna start to wind down here because I'm gonna go see Den of Thieves 2.
Oh, nice.
In a little bit. That's why I wanted to push this up a little bit earlier. I always, say this famous quote: "You don't know what you don't know." I'm a complete moron when it comes to Roman history. Did I ask the right questions? Did I miss anything?
That's some great questions, man. We talked about a lot of different things. And the thing I would say to people as well is, I don't know everything about Rome. I definitely don't. I know a lot about Rome, and I try to put the pieces together to help people. But I would say, do your own research, read some information, and I hope like I was able to get you interested enough to go look into something today and learn about it. But don't take what I have to say as gospel.
Did we miss anything that we should have covered?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of really good stuff, and this was a different angle than I usually take. Because usually people will bring me on and they're like, so I want you to prove what I have to say. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you what actually happened. You know what I mean? Like I did kind of a conservative media tour this year where everybody wanted me to disprove that Trump was Caesar. And I was like, I really don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about the crisis of the 3rd century.
Chad, remember I be talking about that? Yo, I hate that, yo. You go on conservative media and they're like, please do what I want you to do. It's just like, oh my God, is this what we're doing?
Well, there were some really great ones I had as well, though. Like I did the culture war with Tim Pool, and that was kind of like we talked about just about anything, and that was kind of fun. But I like having an open forum where I can just kind of talk about this stuff and see what we can learn from it, man.
Yeah. So they wanted you to prove what?
There was this really big Time magazine article that came out last year by a PhD that was saying that Trump was Julius Caesar. So it became a really popular thing to talk about why Trump was bad for us and blah, blah, blah. So a lot of interviews I was doing was trying to disprove that point.
Disprove that Trump Caesar. Actually is Caesar?
Yeah, and to disprove that he was Caesar. That was what a lot of people want to talk about. And it's I just don't think it's as relevant. I think we haven't been a republic in a long time. And I think to fight, if we're a republic or an empire, is about, it's like rearranging deck chairs in the Titanic.
So how did you handle that?
Doesn't matter what position they're in, the boat's going under.
Right. So how did you handle that, manage that type of scenario where, they're like, hey, we want you to do this thing. And you're like, well,
talk about it for 30 seconds and then just talk about something else and see if they can stop me.
Did it work?
It worked.
Yeah. That's
I talked a lot about the crisis of the 3rd century this year, which I think is one of the most valuable lessons that we can have. And that's control your money, man.
Yeah. So that's what we talked about with the inflation, right?
Yeah. Get control of your money.
That's amazing how we sat here and we talked about Rome, and it all comes right back to that mighty green dollar.
Oh, in that point in time, it was gold and silver, but yeah.
Yeah. Damn.
I think that's the interesting thing about inflation, too, is it was more real for people then because the things they were handing back and forth were the things that were changing.
It was tangible.
Right. And the reason inflation gets so bad is because people wouldn't accept the money people were trying to hand them. Now we're just like tapping things with our iPhone, right? So it's like we become so far away from what it is to handle what it is that's actually changing. Where I had an argument with somebody on X the other day, and they're saying, "What you're talking about is inflation." I'm like, it actually is. You don't understand inflation. That's the problem.
They were saying what?
When I was explaining how inflation worked in the Roman Empire, they're like, "Well, that's not inflation." I'm like, "No, it's inflation. You just don't understand how your money is being inflated by creating more of it." Like that's what people don't understand the core argument because they don't have to deal with it on a daily basis.
What do they think inflation is? Rising prices?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
No,
unfortunately.
inflation isn't rising prices. Prices rise because things are inflated, so now you need more of them to buy the things that are worth less.
Yeah, rising prices is the result of inflation.
Correct. And most people don't understand that.
Bro, you know how I feel like I found a brother, man, because you be saying the shit I be saying. And I'm like, am I the only
That's why
one?
I'm politically homeless, man. There's one of my favorite podcasts I listen to is this guy named Andrew Heaton, and he has this podcast called the what's this podcast called? It's called the Political Orphanage. The
Mhm.
Political Orphanage is for all people that are politically homeless. That's how I feel, man. Like I don't know who I agree with.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I'm definitely in that orphanage because all these motherfuckers get on my nerves. From my hours just said you're invited to the Hotep cookout.
Oh, this a real Hotep brother.
Oh, awesome, man.
So congratulations, you made it inside the walls of Hotepistan. We'll throw a big parade and throw some garland around your neck and we'll have some fun.
We'll have a Roman triumph.
Sure. What is that?
It's where we dress you up in purple, throw you on a horse, then we march some troops behind you, and you get to throw gold at people.
Yeah, one of those. Absolutely. Why purple though?
Because purple was the color of gods. So purple was supposed to signify the god Jupiter.
And God Jupiter.
Jupiter Optimus Maximus, or Jupiter the king god.
Yes. You know that still exists today.
Jupiter?
No, the color of royalty is purple.
Well, it's always been. Because if you look at, this is another rabbit hole for you, so I don't want to go too deep into this, but if you look at Diocletian, who divides the empire in 305,
Mm-hmm.
he's the one that is kind of seen as the model for medieval kingship. A lot of medieval kings are built off kind of the late Western Empire and kind of the Byzantine Empire. Like they take a lot of the models. That's where the idea of like the diadem, which is the crown that's worn, is started in that time period. The purple has kind of always been a thing, as I said, 'cause it was color of Jupiter, but it really became important. The separation between the emperor and the people came then. Before that, the emperor could have been seen among the people. So a lot of medieval kingship is really modeled off Diocletian. That's a whole other rabbit hole if people want to go down that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
It's kind of a conversation for another day, though.
We just covered this the other day. We talked about, hold on, let me see if I could find it really fast. Cause my memory is, usually, prioritizing other things, but I could have sworn, I'm thinking of something different. Hey baby. Theme of today is if you don't have a currency, you don't have a nation.
That's correct. That's what it comes down to, man. That's what it comes down to.
How do I explain that to people? How do you explain
It's
that to
hard
the woke
because
right?
people want all the things that destroy the currency. I think that's the problem.
Wait, what?
Do you know what I mean? Like, people want a lot of social programs that destroys the currency. They want more military spending that destroys the currency. So I think the problem is people have to stop wanting the things that's destroying them, if that makes sense. They have to understand what is happening.
Government spending.
Correct. The more your government spends, the more your inflation happens. So unless we cut that, unless they curb that, and we stop doing this dog and pony show of we're going to shut down the government. You're not. This is bullcrap. Like you're just going to scare some people so that like they just do another omnibus bill and give you everything you want. Individualized spending bills, cut where the money is going. Stop paying for Congress's retirement. Come on, man. Stop blowing up other countries. You know, Ukraine doesn't need our money. Israel doesn't need our money. All the countries around the world don't need our money. Just stop.
I had a fantastic time with you today.
Yeah, man.
What's your website?
JeremyRyanSlate.com, or our company website is commandyourbrand.com.
Commandyourbrand.com. Commandyourbrand.com. I know some of you podcasters out there need some PR work. You need some brand work. Jeremy is your guy. Make sure you hire him. He charges about $8,000 an hour. So make sure you're ready to pull out.
Yeah, I don't do that.
Come on, Jeremy. I'm trying to make sure you get them high price clients. But I appreciate you coming on the show today. We had a fantastic, phenomenal time. Thank you for vindicating me in many of these areas. And I can't wait to watch the interview with you and Shane Cashman. Shane Cashman's absolute brilliant genius. So you guys talk about those fires tomorrow. I can't wait to see that, man.
Oh, it's going to be fun, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, another classic special episode of The Griff Report. I am your host, Hotep Jesus. Make sure you hit the follow. But more importantly, share this, clip it, post the best clips on the internets, and tag me. Get your grift on. I'm out of here, man. Be well, stay merry. Tell somebody in your family that you love them. And as always, Hotep and Bill.
2, 1, boom. Hotep Jesus.
Of all the Jesuses I know, he's the Hotepiest. Social scientist and YouTube host, Hotep Jesus.
How the fuck do you get a name like Hotep Jesus?
The one and only Hotep Jesus.
Ryan Sharp, better known to the world as Hotep Jesus.
Hotep Jesus. Hotep Jesus. Hotep Jesus.
Hotep, you're a genius. HotepJesus.com.
Somebody said, what do you think you are, some kind of Hotep Jesus?
Ooh,
and
that's
I was
good.
Just like, ooh, that's sexy. Yes, I do think I'm Hotep Jesus.